The Underground, Ideas into Action presents an Underground Chat, where we bring the underground conversation to you. Today's topic, create a global strategy, with Brian Branch, President and CEO of the World Council of Credit Unions.
Hi there, Sue Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Stankovic Associates and the Underground Collision. I'm excited to share with you my recent chat with Brian Branch, CEO and President of World Council of Credit Unions. Enjoy. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, Sue. Great to see you. And, we exchanged greetings last night, and it struck me how in all of my conversations with my colleagues and my peers and my friends and our international peers and friends, when we greet each other these days, given the challenges that we have in this world, we just connect, we just engage with each other a lot more at a personal level. And we always start with, how are you doing? Everybody well? Is your family all safe? And so it's a challenging time. We see things that are very disturbing. And yet in our credit union community across the whole world, we get a sense of pulling together more closely and showing that concern for each other more deeply.
Yes, I agree with you. And I think the vulnerability that we've often talked about is coming across as well. And the idea that we all want to love, we all want to belong, and that our members are part of that circle within our community, I think is key. So the reality is I do really care. And it's not something that, when somebody says, trust me, and you go, wonder why they're saying that. In my case, I would just say that when we reach out to each other right now, it's in a thoughtful way. So I appreciate you taking the time. You've been a part of the Underground, and I've been a part of World Council for a number of years, many years. In fact, I was looking back. One of our exciting parts of this move to our new offices was the reflection on the places that we've been together, and there's highlights there. And I know that you celebrated a 30-year anniversary with World Council as well. So thank you for allowing me to be part of that world, and I appreciate you being part of the Underground.
Well, thanks.
You're welcome. Okay, so let's talk. When we were together at the end of February and we had an Underground Collision, we talked about how important Maslow's hierarchy is and some of the things in terms of the levels that people go through. And, it wasn't 2 weeks later, frankly, that we all returned back home from all over the world. And we realized that we were thrown into safety concerns, basic food, water, getting to the grocery stores, all the things that we would have looked at the end of February as something that we progressed from. So I just wanted to ask you about the idea of what lessons have we learned as we move into this next phase with COVID that has been significant for our credit union world?
Yeah, thanks. You started with the Underground, and what, when I think of the Underground, I think about, okay, what are those uncomfortable conversations that we need to have? And then you talk about Maslow's hierarchy, and Maslow's hierarchy starts with basic emotional needs and sustenance, sustainability needs. And all of a sudden, as of February, March, we're thrown back at that very basic level of emotional support during a time of crisis. And how do we support our members who have had the rug taken out from underneath them with meeting their basic sustainability needs? And that's what we heard from credit union systems all over the world. And we had several exchanges with them where, they were looking for a framework, and we're trying to sort out what are the patterns we see across the world. And we talked about the three waves. The first, immediate health impact. And the health impact had dramatic impact on the ability of people to work, to bring in food for their family, keep their working and providing that income. And as companies then had to stop their operations, we had people all of a sudden lose their income, and people who lost their savings, their assets they've accumulated over time. And so it was empowering, it was engaging to see how credit unions all over the world stopped, they changed their priorities, and they focused on how do we help our members with refinancing, how do we help them with managing their savings, how do we help them to stay in business. And it wasn't something where, oh, I guess we got to do this. It was just an immediate reaction. And one of those enduring moments when you think, I'm glad I'm with this credit union movement, this credit union industry. This is what we're all about. You know, Jim Nussle talks about credit unions being the financial first responders. And so the second wave that we saw was all of a sudden credit unions are dealing with dramatic decreases in their revenue because they're refinancing loans, or members can't pay their loans, decreases in liquidity because members are accessing those savings to try to help them get through the crisis. And of course, credit unions have to start dealing with the financial impact on their own books. And then the next, the third wave that we've seen, or we're seeing happen now, is the impact of the global recession. Now, again, we see credit unions moving simultaneously to address those basic needs in the Maslow hierarchy to now more futuristic needs of their members. So as their members have stabilized and they start to rebuild, pull themselves out of the hole caused by the health crisis, now they're finding that the banks aren't letting them withdraw their savings. If they have savings in the bank, the banks that were giving their small businesses loans are no longer giving them loans. And so we have a dramatic increase in requests from credit unions all over the world saying, we need to be able to provide financing to our members as they're getting their businesses up and running, and they're trying to provide for their household and for their families and their communities going forward. So it just moves to another level at which credit unions support their communities.
I think it's fascinating. Several things occurred to me as you were talking. As we were going through the pandemic and continue to go through it, we started referring to it as a people pandemic, because as much as we have to be advisors and counselors, and you have to be a resource for your credit unions and their members worldwide, each of us have also gone through our ability to deal with our own mental strength. And I just wanted to comment that what I find kind of heroic, and back to Jim Nussle's comment, is the fact that we had to rebound pretty quickly and go virtual and go home and adjust to children being home, adjust to circumstances where somebody in the household potentially loses a job, and so or restricted completely, right, where we're not able to go out of our homes. I was just thinking as you were talking about the mental health part of this as well, and I just wanted to make that comment that I'm proud of how credit union employees responded and came together. So the industry came together, World Council came together, and I think we saw a bit of that human caring that you spoke of when we started come out across the country, around the world. So that was one point. And then the second one is when you talked about the economic recession. Before we move on, what are we seeing? I mean, we're seeing it in the U.S. and we're speculating and we're kind of trying to anticipate what the recovery will look like and the shape of it. What is your observation there on a global basis?
Well, I think what we're seeing is different levels of health crisis and recession across the world. And a lot of it has to do with how quickly did that country respond to the COVID-19 threat. We're seeing sort of the startup at the community level of small businesses. That's why I mentioned as many countries are coming out of lockdown and people are starting to start up their small businesses, they find that they've lost a lot of that support or connection to the larger formal infrastructure. And they're turning back to community solutions. They're turning back to credit unions, looking for the kind of support they need to operate. We've seen drawdowns on liquidity, but frankly, I've seen so many crises over the years in so many countries, and you see that liquidity start to decrease, but the fact that the credit unions don't try to constrain that liquidity outflow creates more loyalty, and then we start to see the liquidity come back, and we see membership grow because people take note of how differently the credit unions responded to their time of need than other institutions. So we're in some of the countries that have gotten through the COVID crisis better. Frankly, we're seeing some of the liquidity come back, more in term accounts than current accounts currently. But we'll see that. We're seeing people see again the difference that credit unions make.
Yes, and I think that we're seeing, the depository increases the opportunity to grow, and I'm happy to say that we have a regulator environment today that's being flexible and allowing this resilience, and so it'll be interesting to see how that grows. And I know you as World Council are very active politically to be able to ensure that happens, or to a certain degree in every country around the world. One other thing that occurs to me, and I promise I'll go back to the other questions, but you made the comment that hit me. One of World Council's missions right now is that everyone deserves digital. And as you were talking just now, I thought about the potential for the inequalities, if you will, on how people will bounce back based upon whether they had access to their accounts. And so I just wanted to open that up if you have any comments on that.
Certainly, and we've seen a big difference across countries where credit unions move faster to provide digital channels, and where countries have built shared platforms to allow their numerous small credit unions to offer digital channels. So, where that has been the case, we saw rapid uptake of consumers using those digital channels because they felt safer. And then there are a lot of countries where, frankly, they didn't have those digital channels in place. And so in the early days, we spent a lot of time talking with credit unions about basic protection of your members and your staff with sanitation, about putting up plexiglass shields, about gloves, wiping down counters, about setting up queues in the lobbies to decongest the halls, or having people line up outside. And that, credit unions would send us pictures of their members lining up for blocks outside to get services. Wow. So even for very small deposits or withdrawals or loans, people would have to wait, or saw that they needed to wait and take some risks. So it just reinforced with everyone everywhere the need to pursue digitization of their service channels, what we call Challenge 2025, digitization of the global credit union system. So what an unfortunate but obvious plug for a strategic imperative.
Yes, yes. And I just, when I look at how it fast forwarded initiatives that I've seen when we work with our credit unions and we do strategic planning and we talk about the future, everyone has had initiatives on the table about making sure that the digital movement continues. And here, within a matter of days, people had to go home and work virtually. So it'll be interesting to see how that transitions. Will it transition back? Will it, permanently change our landscape? And that's a conversation that I think we're going to be having here as we look to the future. So you touched upon this a minute ago about you seeing social unrest and social change around the world. And I think of the times over the years that I worked with you, and you're telling me you're going into a certain country, and I'm saying, isn't there a revolution taking place there? And my particular situation that comes to mind is us going to Ukraine shortly after some of the conflict there, or during some of the conflict. How have you, kept yourself motivated and engaged in that? And does that translate to what we're going to see the credit union role continue to be, or maybe even go back to?
Yeah, Frank Beekman once asked me if I had a death wish. I certainly do not. But what has always struck me is that when you have a crisis, when you have a conflict, when you have a natural disaster, when you have a social upheaval, and these days, social upheaval over social justice, you always find credit unions right at the front line of those issues. And that's because credit unions are community organizations. They can't get away. They're not going to close up shop and halt operations like a for-profit stockholder institution will. They're community-driven institutions, and their communities turn to them to find a solution. And credit unions just can do so much good to help heal communities and help people get through a crisis, support their families. Because in the end, what people are looking for are the same basic needs that we're looking for, like you described in the Maslow hierarchy. I just feel like our responsibility at the World Council is to help support them in doing that. And it makes a big difference in people's lives.
And spread the word of what a cooperative really means. We have a tendency to think in terms of it being equal to or similar to a bank or another type of financial institution. And right now, I believe that we have an opportunity to really differentiate not only the approach that we take to financial services, but also the fact that it's governed in a different way. It truly is people coming together to help people. And the opportunity for us to then educate and be part of the solution. And I think there's a debate about what does that mean from a social justice perspective, and we'll go there in a minute. But I saw a comment from Cliff Rosenthal, and we know, that he's one of the fathers of what the cooperative space means to all of us. And, his comment had to do with the idea that the early foundation of the credit union movement was based upon what was taking place within communities and how people needed to help each other to build better lives. And I think that when you're out in the field, and I've certainly had an opportunity to see that firsthand, I've seen what that means to people. I mean, literally. And I think we're seeing that right now in the more advanced systems as well. So as we move then to, what we are seeing from a Black Lives Matter, we've seen the world respond. It's not just, if you will, a local issue. It's a national issue. It's one that I believe the world is helping us stand up to, and even potentially feeling it in their own countries. I believe that was, it's inspiring. At the same time, heartfelt emotions came out as a result of that, as I see the need for us all to stand up and speak out and be part of a solution. So I was just wanted you to have the opportunity to comment on what you're seeing around the world, and any thoughts you have.
We had a number of inquiries from people around the world about what was happening here in the U.S., and lots of expressions of concern and empathy and inquiries about what was going on. But then we came to realize that, no, this was a broader issue. This was not just a U.S. issue. And a lot of our international colleagues would start to share with us the kinds of discrimination, the kinds of social injustice that they were seeing in their own country, and they were seeing analogies, they were seeing parallels to what was happening here in the U.S. So Renee and the African American Great Eating Coalition really stepped up for us. They really shared with us, with our international community, the Global Women Leadership Network, the White Cup group, about, well, where does this come from? And how do you understand the perspective of someone of another ethnic identity? It just resonated with the cooperative structures, the cooperative values that you talked about a moment ago. Credit unions are about equality and equity and non-discrimination and solidarity. Sure, our main business is financial inclusion, but not in a vacuum. Our purpose is about improving people's lives.
Yeah. I think I shared this with you, but following our Global Women's Leadership Network breakfast at the GAC, I was so touched with us celebrating 10 years, and I was so touched by the response we received with the He for She movement and the work that you've identified was needed in the world. And we're seeing now the local groups come together and really stand up and work together around the world in each continent. With that, I then went back to my safe hotel and changed my clothes and said, okay, I'm gonna go for a walk. And I think I shared with you that one of the people that worked for the hotel had noticed that I had my bracelets from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And during that conversation, she shared and gave me bracelets from her home country. And then went on to show me pictures of not only injustice, but massacre that are occurring.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt so grateful and so honored and so touched that I walked across the street to the Episcopal Church and said a prayer for humanity and for the world. And this has been one of those weeks that have touched me personally when I saw the rioting and some of the things that took place right there in that same square. I believe that we're in a tipping point, and we have an opportunity to step up and to have our voices heard and to express what we feel, but do it in a way that is a way of listening, not telling. So it's an interesting time. I think we're navigating a lot of issues, but I really appreciated Renee's comments as she finished up the webinar yesterday of hope and unity and the idea that we have an association of Americans stepping up as one unit. So on behalf of those of us that had an opportunity to hear the webinar, I just want to thank you for leading the charge on such a raw but important webinar. It was good information.
Well, thanks. And you point out these are interesting times, and you give the story of the woman that you met at your hotel. And I'd suggest it's not only interesting times, but it's a much less distant world. It's a much smaller world than it used to be. And so on one side, you look at the coronavirus and how quickly that spread and impacted across the world, because we are much more connected than we ever were before. You look at the impact of the global recession. Again, our production chains, our international trade is so connected, much more so than ever before. We connect with people like the woman you met at your hotel who comes from another country, another experience. And, I can remember years and years ago where it was just took a lot more time to connect with someone like that. And it was much more distant. Telecommunications were more expensive, more difficult. And now the world is very tightly knit together. It's hard to be isolated. What's happening here at home is so much more close and so much more personal for our international colleagues in other countries. And that's why we had such an outpouring of inquiries and expressions of support and empathy and such an active participation in the webinar with Renee.
It's fabulous. I think we we haven't talked much about the World Council, but I'm going to take a moment to just express the legacy of the leaders and the support and leadership that you commit to today is not always easy. In fact, it's very difficult work. And we as an industry need to understand that now more than ever, we need to step up and we need to support the good things that are reaching out, because we can't isolate. We're not one country, we're not one continent. We are a global community. And if we are going to have systemic and some type of a real change, we need to have organizations like World Council, and it's completely dependent upon the people that can help fund it, the people that will step up and volunteer and commit to that personal contact. And today I posted a picture of Mike. As you know, my husband's very committed to these initiatives as well. And it was a picture of him at the orphanage in 2010. And a young man by the name of Mike, the two of them met and they just kind of stayed together for that whole period. And when they were nailing and, working on some of the housing at that time, because it was in a different place, they came together and they bonded, and it just brought back what that means to us, the ability to see things firsthand. Education requires us to experience, and World Council allows the credit union communities around the world to do that. And so that's my way. I'm proud to be on the Worldwide Foundation board. I'm proud to be part of the Global Women's Leadership Network, the YCUB, the grassroots efforts of the work you do. But I'm even stronger in my commitment to the project engagement work and the work that goes on in the field. So I wanted to add, what I feel the ideas into action, and then I'll ask you. But to anyone that's listening to this, I believe that we have to not only commit to our local communities, but commit to our global communities, because the impact is the world. And so through the World Council, you have an opportunity to do that. So what are your ideas into action?
Well, thanks. Well, a couple of things. One is take a look at your policy framework and make sure that you don't have unintended obstacles there for diversity and inclusion. Take a look at your professional development, your succession paths and opportunities, and make sure that you don't have obstacles for people of diversity to move to senior positions or management positions or boards. And so we're not talking about tokenism. We're talking about making sure that people who are qualified and may face obstacles that we're not aware of have the opportunity and the encouragement to step forward. And looking at our communities and how we identify people within our communities that can participate to represent their communities. The other thing that, where we had a great connection with Renee and the African American Credit Union Coalition is, Renee said, I believe that people are not inherently racist or exclusive or exclusionary. And I believe that it's just a matter of people need to have more contact with each other. They need to be in proximity. They need to work together. And I said, yeah, that's always been the mission of the World Council. And you talked about Mike and Mike bonding. The work of the World Council has always been across borders. It's about a community which shares values, reaching out across those borders, sharing their experience with each other, working together on common challenges, and building a sense of international community. So right now, frankly, we have to do this via virtual means, but we've found all kinds of interesting things we can do with technology until we have a sense that travel is safer, that face-to-face meetings are safer. So frankly, it's been disorienting for me not to be on the road constantly. but we're constantly in communication with everybody. And there's still a lot we can do to bring our groups together so that there's more. It's from that working together, living together, that we understand. We get past stereotypes, and we get past lack of familiarity, and we get to that kind of bonding.
I agree. So thank you very much for your time. My best to the family, and I'll be back in touch.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Hooray. Thanks.
Okay. Bye-bye.